If you are visiting with us, and we do have a lot of visitors, we have handouts. If you would like to follow along with the lesson tonight and you're someone that likes to take notes, raise your hand if you didn't get one on your way in, and one of the men in the back would be happy to give you one. They correspond with the lesson, and so you can fill in the blank as you go or take your own notes as we go through the lesson tonight. Like I said, we have a lot of visitors tonight, and I'm thankful for everyone being here. I do want to start off by just saying that we are now getting to the practical side of our evangelism series. Yesterday, we spent 3 lessons laying the foundation to talk about what even is evangelism. How does the New Testament use that word? We dissected what it means to teach the gospel and what the idea is to be an evangelist. Someone who is a good newser was the word that we used. We looked at Jesus, the master evangelist, somebody who we should always look up to, and Lord willing, throughout the rest of the nights, we will go through examples of Jesus teaching others as he was on this earth. And we also spent a lot of time talking about the early Christians and how this was a no-brainer for them. This was something they didn't have to be stirred to do. This was something that was already a part of their lifestyle. And so tonight we'll begin the series of practically, how do we go about to take the gospel message out to somebody? What are some ways today in 2021 America that I can get the gospel message to somebody? And I do just want to say, by way of a reminder to those who were here yesterday and to our visitors, as we're talking about taking the gospel message out, we're talking about reading the scriptures with them. We talked about our approach of once we get a study, we are simply going to present to them what the gospel itself says. Pick one of the 4, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, and start reading with them. And so as we talk about today, getting these Bible studies, as we get practical, remember that once we get these studies, we're reading with them about the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're trying to stay away from language like, hey, why don't you sit down and let me lecture at you for 45 minutes? But rather, how about we get together and read the gospel? That's the kind of thing we're looking at. So I just wanted to say that from the beginning, because as we're using these examples and going through them, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. 6 things I'm going to point out today that I believe are helpful, good things that aid in getting Bible studies with folks. Your job and my job today is to pick 2 of those that you want to be better at, and you don't get to pick 2 that you already do. So pick 2 that you're not familiar with and apply them to your daily life. Let's go ahead and talk about some things that are helpful. But for starters, I almost forgot our memory verse for the week. Like I said, we got a lot of visitors, so what we've been doing at the beginning of each lesson is reading this verse together out loud. So after I say Colossians 4, 5, and 6, and start in on the word conduct, I want everyone to join in as we read this verse together. Colossians 4, 5, and 6. Conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Your speech must always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person. That's our focus this week. Let's get into some practical ways we can go about evangelizing. Number 1 on the list tonight is the influence that we will have through righteous living and living in the way that the Lord wants us to. For starters, I would like you to turn your Bibles over to Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2. And we're going to read verses 14 through 16. We're going to be looking at a lot of different passages tonight, so mind us dropping into different contexts at different moments. But these are a few verses that have always stood out to me in regard to evangelism. Philippians 2, verse 14. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I will have reason to glory, because I did not run in vain, nor toil in vain. You know, for the longest time, I separated verses 14 and 15 in my mind, mostly because growing up, the stairs that led down to my bedroom, my parents had verse 14 plastered on the wall. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, and that's exactly right. But did you notice why Paul says that they need to pay close attention to not being like this? What happens when you're the type of person that doesn't grumble and dispute and complain about things the way the rest of the world does? Paul says in verse 15, you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. You will appear as lights in the world if you will learn to not complain the way the rest of the world does. Boy, apply that in the workplace. People who are just constantly griping about the boss or griping about the situation that they're in because of whatever job you're in. And you're the guy over there not complaining. You going to stand out in that moment? Absolutely you are. And people will notice that. They will ask, why does this guy have it together while everything else around us in the workplace is falling apart, or when the boss is involved in X, Y, and Z type of things? You will stand out as a light if you will be someone that doesn't complain in those moments the way the rest of the world does, just by simply being righteous, doing what the Lord asks you to do. But going along with this, we must also understand the influence of unrighteous living. Consistency will go such a long way with people in the world if we will just simply apply the Scriptures. And specifically, there is one way I've learned in any group of non-Christians to quickly identify myself as a Christian, and that's just in the way I talk. And really, it's more so in the things that I don't say. I'll talk a little bit more about it in the lesson, but recently, in an effort to want to evangelize more and get into my community more, I recently joined the local volunteer fire department. And it was, within the week of being there, one of the first things that someone said to me was, "Oh, wow, you don't curse. You must be one of those Christians." And he was identifying something about me. He knew just from the way that I wasn't talking that something was different, that I identified differently than the rest of the world did. And isn't that so true? I almost inherently do that with anyone that I come into contact with in the world. If I notice that they don't curse the way everyone else does, I immediately go, they must have some faith of some kind. It separates you. It puts you in a different camp. Just in the way we live. And consistency with this will go such a long way. I can't tell you how many times at the fire department or other places I'm involved with the world that they almost are expecting you at some point to show your true colors, and they're almost wanting to pull it out of you. We have to stay firm in those moments. And it's not to say that if you are a Christian who's been giving in those ways that you can't make the changes. Because if you have been living in an unrighteous way and you give a stop to it, guess what they'll notice within the next week or two? You've changed. You've taken your dedication to Christ more seriously. This is something I had to experience in high school. I was living in a way that was not righteous, and I had to make a change. People noticed. So we need to be careful about this. I also want to say this. Don't use this as a cop-out. I think oftentimes we also look at this point and we're like, well, if I just live a good life as a Christian and I do all the right things, then people will know that I'm a Christian and they'll come and ask me to teach them the gospel. Not necessarily so. There's a balance to be said here. Some people might say that you just don't do those things because you're just a good person. Maybe you should open your mouth and say, this is why I don't curse, or this is why I'm not involved in these types of things. Don't just assume that people will get the picture from the way that you live your life. There's a balance here that we need to see, that we need to meet. Number 2, we need to tell our family, our friends, and our coworkers. This is a point we emphasized well whenever we were talking about it being a no-brainer to the early Christians. But did you know in John chapter 1, did you know the way that Simon Peter was brought to Jesus? It was by his brother Andrew. John 1 and verse 40 tells us that one of the two who heard John the Baptist speaking and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. And he found first his own brother Simon and said to him, "We have found the Messiah," which translated means Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. And Jesus looked at him and said, "You're Simon, the son of John. You shall be called Cephas," which is translated Peter. Peter the rock, the one we read about all over the New Testament, was brought to Jesus by his brother Andrew. We need to talk to our family about this message. And I get it. In some ways, our family can be the hardest people to share this news with. Because out of everyone, our family knows the old me. They know how I used to be, how I used to act. And maybe you're having the same hesitation with coworkers, if you're someone who has come to Christ later in life. And we got to be sure we point out to them why we're different. And we got to tell them about this good news. In John chapter 4, we made this point yesterday as well, with the woman at the well. We will do a more deep dive into Jesus' conversation with this lady, Lord willing, in the lesson on Wednesday night. But in John chapter 4, in verse 28, it tells us that after she knows that Jesus is the Messiah, it says that the woman left her water pot, the whole reason she came there to begin with, and went into the city and said to the men, "Come see a man who told me all the things that I have done. This is not the Christ, is it?" She went to tell everybody. And on Sunday, we talked about how this woman has zero standing and zero credibility at this point with those in the town. But she knew who to point them to. And a little bit later in the chapter, we learned that they say, "We no longer believe because of your word, but because of his word. We went and met him. We went and saw him." We got to get this message out to the people closest to us. And this is the other thing I want to point out about this. Sorry, I keep getting behind on the PowerPoint. Family includes our young children. Okay? You remember what Paul said in Ephesians 6? It's quite the serious thing. So if you're a father and you're a Christian, you need to perk up and listen to what Paul said in Ephesians 6:4. "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." I really like in verse 4, this word for "bring them up" is the same word for "nourish" that we saw back in verse 29 of chapter 5. Nourish them in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. Don't get so focused on getting the gospel out to your coworkers that you forget about the young souls in your home. And I wanted to just take a second, to address the moms in the audience as well. I'm sure it can kind of be hard being at home with the children and filling this pool, to want to be out there in the way maybe your husband is, or in the way someone else you know is, in the way that they're involved with the world and have those opportunities. Please don't overlook the important responsibility you have in teaching your own children the gospel. Y'all, that is evangelizing. And it's our expectation, or it's God's expectation. Y'all remember that young man that ran around with Paul for a long time named Timothy? You guys remember how he came to the gospel? What does Paul say in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 5? "I'm mindful of your sincere or genuine faith within you, which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am sure that is in you as well." Timothy's start in the faith started with his mother and his grandmother. Let's put a focus and emphasis on teaching our children. And I would be remiss if I didn't bring up two men in 1 Samuel, Eli and Samuel, who both were so involved in teaching others and trying to lead God's people that they lost their own children in the process. Are some of you familiar maybe with the Babylon Bee? This is one of my favorite. It's a satirical website, so this is not a real article that was written in terms of something that was real. It's satirical. But father of three wonders when he'll get chance to influence others for Christ. And this is what it says about this fictional character. "Smith reportedly spends his days working 10 hours at a desk job and his nights talking and playing with his three children. And he said, I just wish God would place a few people in my life for whom I could make an eternal difference." Smith told reporters, his head in his hands, "I just don't have time to do anything for the kingdom of God while I provide for my family and spend time with my three boys. Surely the Lord will have something important for me to do someday," he added sadly. He further stated that every second of his day is taken up with mundane tasks like instructing and caring for his children, leaving him little to no time to evangelize or influence others for the gospel. "I've just got my hands full with these kids. When will I ever get to do some important kingdom work for God?" he lamented. Again, let me say this is fake, this is satirical, but does it not sometimes point out a flaw in us fathers? We almost guilt ourselves about not being in the world enough evangelizing, and that's a priority we need to have. But we cannot overlook the evangelistic opportunity in front of us. Pay close attention to those kids, fathers and mothers. Raise them, nourish them up in the instruction of the Lord. Don't overlook that responsibility. That was the mistake Eli and Samuel both made in 1 Samuel. Let's pay close attention to this. Because there's so many visitors, I hope those who were here yesterday will allow me to retell the story of Sister Nancy. Sister Nancy is right there in the middle. she was baptized about a year ago now. We met her through social media, actually. And after we had baptized Nancy, we'd been studying with her for a couple months. We decided we would like to continue studying with her, as you should do with any new disciple. So we said, Nancy, would it be okay if we came over to your house and started reading through the book of Acts together? And she said, yeah, that would be great. Please come on over. So me and my coworker, he's the one right there in the bottom left, came over to her home and started reading through the book of Acts together. And no longer than a week into it, she said, Chase, Stephen, my daughter would like to join. Would that be okay? Yeah, Miss Nancy, it's totally fine. Week after that, hey, Chase and Stephen, is it okay if my son joins as well? Yeah, Miss Nancy, that's totally fine. The week after that, hey, Miss Nancy, how's it going? Good. My granddaughter wants to come. Is it okay if she comes? Yeah, Miss Nancy. And then her other granddaughter started coming. And we said, okay, great. This is an awesome opportunity, but this has turned into a study with her family. We really just want to ground Miss Nancy. So, Nancy, how about we come to your house a little bit earlier in the day and we'll just answer any Bible questions you have? She said, that'd be great. We start going over to her house a little bit earlier in the day. What do you want to study, Nancy? Revelation. Okay? We'll get into Revelation. Absolutely, sister. That sounds good. One weekend. My other son wants to start joining this study. Is it okay if he comes? Absolutely, Miss Nancy. That's totally fine. And we've also started studying with her son-in-law, who is atheist. Within 1 month of her being a Christian, we were studying with every single member of her family because this message was just that important to her. And as I said on Sunday, it was not anything I had to poke her to do. She got it. She knew that this message needed to be taken out to everybody. I need to tell everyone about the gospel of Jesus Christ. Tell your family, tell your friends as soon as you can. I'll also say this. Going along with some of these points is just to remember the darkness we're in. If you're ever struggling for motivation to want to go out and reach the lost, just take a second and think about where you were. A couple different passages that I think do a good job at reminding us of where we were. Ephesians chapter 2 in verses 1 through 3. Ephesians 2, 1 through 3. Paul speaks to these brethren who are forgiven and says, you were dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you formerly walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. Among them, we too all formerly lived in the lust of our flesh, indulging the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, even as the rest. Does everyone in here remember what it was like before you were a Christian? I hope everyone can just think about how miserable you were. When you had no direction, you were lost in your sin and you knew it. Let that give you the tick you need to go snatch others out of the fire. That's a scary place to be. If you will allow me to drop into a context, to borrow a phrase from Peter in 1 Peter 2, you'll be familiar with this when he said, like newborn babies, long for the pure milk of the word so that by it you may grow in respect to salvation. Verse 3, if you have tasted the kindness of the Lord. I really love that phrase, if you've tasted the kindness of the Lord. Why do you like that? Why would I like that phrase? Because when you taste something good, what do you want to do? You want to share it with everybody. You want to take it to them. My grandfather's here. It makes me think of my grandmother, Ernestine. A lot of y'all know her. Her lemon cake is one of my favorite things to eat. And I remember being so excited to share that bite, share that slice with Rebecca when we first met and we got a chance for her to try that lemon cake. If you've tasted the kindness of the Lord, you better be quick to take it to everybody you know. Because you remember how awful it was before you tasted the kindness of the Lord. So this really provokes a thought in me where I want to encourage everybody with the people you're studying with or the people you're trying to get a study with. Just reverse the roles for a second. This is a helpful exercise to do. Put yourself in their shoes as you think about somebody bringing the gospel message to you. Number one, what kind of things would be helpful? If you were for the first time considering Christianity and someone is sitting down with you to teach you that gospel, what would be helpful in that scenario? And by the way, if I can make this side point, there are a lot of people in here who were raised going to the church. I'm not going to do the show of hands thing, but I'm sure there's a lot of folks in here. There's also some folks in here who were not raised going to the Lord's church. Talk to those brethren. Ask them what it was like when someone was studying with them. Ask them what kind of things were helpful, as well as ask them what kind of things were hurtful. We can learn from those brethren. But let me tell you a couple things that I think would be helpful in that moment. Feeling listened to and heard when sharing hard things. We come into these studies with an agenda, rightfully so, to get the gospel message to them. But never forget you're talking to a person that has baggage, spiritual baggage, emotional baggage, things that they need to be heard out about. Maybe it's things that make you uncomfortable. Try your best to be okay in those moments. Try your best not to be overly shocked as they reveal things with you. Remember that you were in their shoes at one time as well. Listen to them, hear them, and be patient with them as they work through those different things and as the gospel will address those things that they're dealing with. And also, know that any question is allowed to be asked. And we talked about this yesterday. Don't let that scare you off from getting studies with people. There was an easy answer to when someone asked me a question I don't know the answer to. Do you remember the answer? I don't know. That's fine to say, but then go figure it out and patiently answer the question that they asked you. And by the way, sometimes they still will ask questions that you will never know the answer to. That happens a lot as well. And that's all right. The Scriptures has revealed to us exactly what we need to know. What kind of things would be hurtful? On the flip side of this, what about belittling them and their questions or their intelligence of the Scriptures? Not everyone has the same Bible knowledge we have. Don't get after them if they didn't know something that you expected them to know. Be patient with them and don't belittle their Bible knowledge. But the flip side of that is also, it could be hurtful to assume that they know more than they actually know. And this could especially be a temptation when you're studying with somebody who does claim to be a Christian. I've studied with a lot of people who claim to be a Christian who know virtually nothing about the Bible. I have equally studied with people who claim to be a Christian and they know a lot about the Bible. It could be a toss-up one way or the other. That's why in that first study that we talked about yesterday, we're going to do our best to get to know them, figure out what their background is so that we can appropriately steer the Bible study in a direction that it needs to go and let the gospel address those problems. The gospel's good at that. So, it's helpful in those moments to just put yourself in their shoes and ask, how can I be helpful to this person? Number 4. Show people that you care. Look over at 1 Corinthians chapter 9 for just a second. Again, I do apologize. I am more of a textual preacher, and I would rather just park in a text and go through it. And so it bothers me when I have to drop into context. But in this particular section in Corinthians, Paul is encouraging them to give up their own rights by using himself as an example with the rights he's given up. And in verse 19 of 1 Corinthians 9, he says, "For though I'm free from all men, I've made myself a slave to all so that I may win more. To the Jews I became a Jew, so that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law as under the law, though not being myself under the law, so that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law as without law, though not being without the law of God, but under the law of Christ, so that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I've become all things to all men, so that I might be by all means save some. I do all things for the sake of the gospel, so that I may become a fellow partaker of it." What Paul is saying is that he cared about all kinds of people, and he met them where they were. This does not mean Paul was involved in sinful things. I don't believe that's at all the idea. But in like manner that Jesus was eating with the sinners and tax collectors, Paul spent some time with some people that weren't really like him. And he was patient with them. And he showed them that he cared for them. so that he might win some. We talked about this yesterday. Who are we doing the winning for? We're doing it for God, not for ourselves. And Paul's already made that point back in chapter 1. That he can't even remember everyone he's baptized because it's all been for the Lord. Invest time in your relationships with these people. There's nothing wrong with having a Bible study at the building. I do think it sometimes can create a barrier of sorts. I'm a huge fan of the kitchen table. I think it takes down barriers that could be there that you're not aware of. And I would have even encouraged you to have them for a meal. Show that you're genuinely interested not only in their spiritual well-being, but you want to know them as a person, as a friend, the way that you would anyone else. Build that relationship with them so that they know that you really are there for them. You're not just there to check your spiritual card that you got a Bible study with somebody. You actually love them and you want to spend time with them. You want to know another way that I think is super helpful to show people that you care? Learning different languages. This is not one I get to speak of from experience. At least where I live, though, I do speak 2 languages, English and Kentucky English. So that counts for something, I guess. But I'll tell you what, I have a lot of good friends, some preachers, some not, who have done tremendous things in the Lord's kingdom by just simply learning another language. And this is a biblical idea, by the way. What happened on the day of Pentecost in Acts 2? 16 different nations showed up, and what gift did the Holy Spirit give the apostles? The ability to speak in tongues. And that wasn't gibberish, that was an actual language. It was an actual language that they were speaking to the 16 different nations that were there. Well, I love the example of Paul in Acts chapter 21. This shows his bilingual nature. He's probably trilingual, actually. But in Acts chapter 21, in verse 37, this is after he's been arrested and there's about to be this enormous riot. It says in verse 37, as Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the commander, "May I say something to you?" And he said, "Do you know Greek? Then you're not the Egyptian who some time ago stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 men of the assassins out into the wilderness." And Paul said, "I'm a Jew of Tarsus of Cilicia, a citizen of no insignificant city, and I beg you allow me to speak to the people." So what language is he talking to this guy in, this Roman centurion? He's talking to him in Greek. What happens in verse 40? When he's given him permission, Paul, standing on the stairs, motioned to the people with his hand, and when there was a great hush, he spoke to them in the Hebrew dialect. Do you see the value in being able to speak a couple different languages? And I think that is somewhat lost on us in America, as our continent is just enormous and everyone speaks English. But it is not uncommon for brethren in European countries to speak 2 or 3 languages. And let me just say a word to the young people. I grew up here. I went to Kentucky schools. I graduated from Tate's Creek. I had to take 2 years of a foreign language, and I know all you others do too. Take those classes seriously, whether you're preaching or not. I think Spanish would be a valuable language. I took French for some reason. I don't know why. But take those language courses seriously. They could aid you one day in being able to preach the gospel. Again, whether you're an evangelist, full-time evangelist or not. My coworker, Stephen Rouse, that I had up there, he is a fluent Spanish speaker. He has worked hard at it from the time he was 16. And there have been countless opportunities he has that I don't have because he knows how to speak Spanish. I would take that seriously, and it shows people that you care. Even if you don't learn how to fully talk to them in their language, learning a few key phrases will show them, I'm interested in the way you talk, and I want to say a few things to you. So for what it's worth, I think that's something to consider. Another way to show people that you care is just getting involved with the community, being seen with the community. In Acts chapter 18, again, a passage we looked at yesterday, where we saw that Paul was able to be an evangelist without being fully paid by a church. In Acts 18 and verse 1, after these things he left Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And he came to them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them, and they were working, for by trade they were tent makers. And he was reasoning in the synagogue every Sabbath and trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. You think Paul had a lot of opportunities as he was out selling and making tents for people? Absolutely he did. He was involved in the community. And there are hints in the book of Acts, by the way, that he had friends that weren't Christians, that there were different people he spent some time with and I believe trying to convert them and trying to help them, both kings and rulers as well as different businessmen as well. He was a man of the community. And there's nothing wrong about that. We don't want to get so wrapped up in those things that it takes us away from our focus of the gospel. But there's a few ways to do that. For starters, I believe volunteering is an excellent way to do that. As I had mentioned, I've recently joined the local volunteer fire department. I'm still very new to it, and so I'm still having to take some of the classes to be able to do a lot of the things those guys do. But it's been a true blessing to get an opportunity with some folks that otherwise I probably would have never been able to talk with. And the more that they see me, the more questions I get. What do you think about this, Chase? What is the biblical teaching on this particular subject? And it doesn't just have to be volunteer firefighting. There are volunteer opportunities all over the place. And I bet you if you just ask around, there are a few of you who do volunteer and need help at your local volunteer place that you do something. Find a way to get involved with the community and get to know them. Maybe it's just working in your kids' schools. I know that has presented a lot of good opportunities with people as they are trying to meet different people. And if you're somebody whose kids are homeschooled, there are a lot of good homeschool groups out there that are even faith-based, but maybe those folks come from a different background than you do. Why don't you get involved that way and try to teach them the gospel through? I'm sure that in here who are quite well versed in sports. If your kids are interested in sports, why not get in a coaching position and find an opportunity there? Look at Jim, 4-H. That's an excellent, another good opportunity to reach the community as well. And so I could probably slow down and look at a lot of people in here. And there's a lot of different ways people are involved in the community, and you need to capitalize on those opportunities with folks. But the point is, we want to be seen in the community. We're not going to be these folks who hole up somewhere and just try to get away from the world. Paul in 1 Corinthians 5 actually condemns that and says that's not what we're to do. But we're to be out there, teaching the lost. Number 5, we don't want to be afraid to try something new. If you'll back up a little bit into chapter 17, when Paul was in Athens, in chapter 17 and verse 16, it says, "Now while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was being provoked within him as he was observing the city full of idols. And he was reasoning in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be present." We often will zero in on Sabbath synagogue Paul, right? He did that a lot on his preaching trips. In fact, in chapter 13, we read what I believe would have been his typical synagogue sermon to people. Chapter 17, he's not talking to Jews. He's talking to Gentiles. And he changes up his entire approach as he goes to talk to these people. What's really cool is his approach changes, but his message is the same. It all comes back to Jesus crucified and him resurrected. That's a really cool thing to see him bring it back full circle to. But did you see where he was reasoning at in verse 17? Not only in the synagogue, but in the marketplace. He's in the marketplace. And I think it's worth asking the question, what is our marketplace? We don't really go to the marketplace in the same way we do anymore. At least where I live, we actually have our groceries ordered. It's a whole lot easier to do that, and we've actually found we save money that way because we order just what we need. And I'm sure there's a lot of folks in here who do that as well. So what is our marketplace? Well, if I can throw this up there for a second. Our marketplace today. There are a lot of good opportunities to be had on social media. And I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but this just happened today. We do some Zoom studies where I'm at. Ever since COVID hit, we were doing meetups that were in person, but then they went online. And just recently, with things opening back up, we've been doing a hybrid thing of sorts, where we broadcast the Zoom study, and people who want to come in person are welcome to, but others who want to stay at home and watch and participate that way, they're able to do it. So it's a hybrid thing. And just today, we pay on Facebook advertising. Each month we have a budget as a church that we use to pay for these studies to get out there so people in the community know that they're happening. Just today I get this message. "Good morning. How do you join your Zoom Bible studies? Thanks." I respond to her, tell her how to get to them. "Thank you. I look forward to joining you all tomorrow. Is your study interactive? Yes, everyone's welcome to comment or ask questions throughout. Thank you. What's really funny about this message too is I replied up here. I replied up here, and my coworker actually sent that one. We're both watching that because sometimes I don't immediately get to respond and he sees it. And so it's kind of funny. Him and I both responded to this lady at different times. But this is an opportunity. And if the Lord wills, she will be there tomorrow night. That is so encouraging. There is also a new sister in Christ in Harrisburg named Violet. She did not meet us through our Facebook advertising, but there is a sister in Christ in Harrisburg, April Starr, who takes a lot of pictures of Harrisburg and has gained quite the following on social media as a result of it. And one Sunday she posted a picture of one of the hymns we were singing in services. And Violet sent her a private message and said, "Oh, your church uses shape notes of all things." That's what she asked. That is so cool. Where do you go to church? And April told her. And she started worshiping with us. And we started studying with her. And about a month ago or 2 months ago now, she was baptized into Jesus Christ. All from Instagram. We don't need to look at these things down our nose and act like that they're not useful. They can be if done right. I really do think in a lot of ways that is our marketplace. But for maybe some people it's not social media. Maybe for some folks it would be work or a club or school of some kind. Maybe the old farmers that meet down at the Dairy Queen. I don't know. There's multiple different ways that you can get involved that way in your local marketplace. Or maybe it is literally going to the grocery store and striking up a conversation with someone who is also trying to buy that box of Pop-Tarts. I don't know. Find a way to reach out. Run into people. Talk to them. Going along with that, I think there's a lot of value in doing spiritual things in public. Read Matthew 6, though, where Jesus will specifically warn against the heart that can come with doing spiritual things in public. I do a lot of Bible reading in public. That's kind of become my go-to with evangelism. Whenever we first moved to Harrisburg, I knew I needed to get studies immediately because that was the whole reason I moved up there and was trying all kinds of things. And so I found this really busy food court in downtown Harrisburg. And about 8 stories above that food court was a bunch of government offices and a bunch of local businesses. And if you went outside and crossed the street, there was the state capitol building there. And a lot of people would come into this food court to eat lunch. And so one day I walked in at about 12, had a hard time finding a table, and I just sat down and started reading my Bible. And nothing was working there, so I was like, well, maybe I got here too late. I didn't really get a good table. So the next day, I showed up at 10:30 before everyone was there. And I stepped back and I kind of looked at the food court and I was like, where is everyone going to be coming in the most at? And I was a patron. I would buy, a meal or a coffee or something. And I would sit at the table that was right next to the entrance. And I would read my Bible. Did that for a day. And I think I had one good conversation. I was like, there's probably something else I can add. So the next day I came back and I took my Bible out and I took another Bible out and I set it across the table from me from where I was reading. And I started to notice people walking up. And some people would do that like half dance, like they wanted to sit down, but they weren't sure if someone was sitting there. So I was like, I'll tweak it some more. I had a little nameplate, a little sign the size of a nameplate, and I just put on it, "Would you like to read the Bible with me? Please have a seat." I sat it there. And the next day I had 3 people sit down and read the Bible with me. And that led to a bunch of other opportunities, eventually led me to doing a campus Bible study at the local university. And I just had to tweak it a little bit and a little bit more at a time. And it all just came from reading my Bible in public. Find a good spot to do that. Maybe it's in a park. Maybe it is at the local university. Maybe it's in the break room at work. Why don't you find an opportunity to read your Bible like that and see if other people will join you? And the last thing I want to say about this too is that you want to get multiple lines in the water. Wasn't this Jesus' way of calling people? He said to them, "Follow me and I will make you become fishers of men." Think like a fisherman, y'all. A fisherman don't go on the water and just have one line out. He has multiples. And the kind of lines I like to have out are the lines that are working when I'm not working, like social media, I can be preaching this lesson right now and possibly get a message from somebody that wants to have a Bible study because of what they saw on social media. I think it's really helpful to have multiple avenues in which you're reaching out to different people. So just be thinking about that. And I get asked a lot from different people, do you think this will work? Or do you think getting studies this way will work? And my answer every time is, I don't know. Go try it. So if you've got something new, please feel free to come up and ask me. This is not the only ways you can be evangelizing. We talked about yesterday that these are things that have been working for me. What I want to stir everyone to do is to find things that work for you to reach out to the lost. And number 6, plan evangelism as a church. This needs to be a mission-focused type of thing. And I know the elders would get behind this. There should be a priority, a focus on teaching the lost. In Acts chapter 11, the church in Antioch is an excellent example of this. They had been scattered back in Acts chapter 8 because of Saul of Tarsus and the persecution that arose against the church. And it tells us that these people, in verse 19, that were scattered because of this persecution that occurred in connection with Stephen, they made their way to Phoenicia and Cyprus and Antioch, speaking the word to no one except Jews alone. But there were some of them, men of Cyprus and Cyrene, who came to Antioch and began to speak to the Greeks also, preaching the Lord Jesus. And the hand of the Lord was with them, and a large number who believed turned to the Lord. And the news about them reached the ears of the church at Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas off to Antioch. And when he arrived and witnessed the grace of God, he rejoiced and began to encourage them all with resolute heart to remain true to the Lord. And he was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and of faith, and considerable numbers were brought to the Lord. And he left for Tarsus to look for Saul. And when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. And for an entire year, they met with the church and taught considerable numbers. And the disciples were first called Christians in Antioch. This church was so busy. Barnabas gets called down there. Barnabas sees how busy they are, and he says, Saul needs to be here to see this, and brings him in as well. This church was focused on teaching the lost. Does this church have a focus on teaching the lost? I hope so. That's the only way to get it going, is if everyone collectively decides, we are doing this. There's a number of ways to do this today. I love door knocking. It's not something I've done a lot of in the last year due to COVID. But it is something that I have found to be super effective in different parts. A good friend of mine named Andy Mitchell, who was preaching down in North Carolina for a long time and is now up in the Youngstown, Ohio area, I believe does it really well. He simply walks up to the door. They answer. My name's Andy. This is so-and-so. I like to read the Bible. Would you like to read the Bible with me? Just as simple as that. And I know that sounds so simple, but it works, y'all. And sometimes you'll get a door in the face, and that's okay. I remember when I lived in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. This was a tactic I would use a lot, and got a few studies as well. Fairs are another awesome opportunity for this kind of thing. Again, when I was in Lawrenceburg, there is the world famous Burgoo Festival that takes place every year. I'm sure everyone in here has heard of it. And I went to the elders and asked, would it be okay if we got a booth together and spent some time taking shifts and talking to people as they were walking by our booth. And we had different pamphlets. We'd built this last minute thing that had this, is this in the Bible, yes or no? And it would light up correct or incorrect. And man, that was an awesome opportunity because like I had Mark 16:16 on there, and I would have some people hit no, that's not in the Bible. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved. He who disbelieves shall be condemned. And it was inevitable. They would turn to me and say, that's in the Bible? Yeah, let me show you this. Outdoor singings, I think, is another great opportunity. We're planning to do one with our local congregation soon. I know that the church in Philadelphia has done this a few times and had a couple of baptisms and good results from that. Y'all got a great parking lot out there. You got some great folks around here. Why not start singing? Singing is a way of teaching Christ. In 1 Timothy 3, I believe Paul is quoting an early Christian hymn when he says, by common confession, great is the mystery of godliness. He who was revealed in the flesh was vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up in glory. I believe that that was likely an early Christian hymn that proclaimed who Jesus was. We need to be singing. We're studying with a man right now, actually, who, when we were having to meet outdoors because we got kicked out of our space for COVID purposes, he was on his way to the ATM, driving through the parking lot that we were meeting in, had his windows down, heard us singing, Jesus Saves. Y'all remember what that whole song is about? Shouting Jesus Saves so people hear it. He heard us, he stopped in, and we're still having Bible studies with him. Go outside and sing. Share the joy that you have in the Lord. And neighborhood studies. This is one of the coolest ways to see an entire church get involved. Each month, one of the members decides they're going to host a Bible study in their home every Tuesday night, Wednesday night, or Thursday night, whatever have you. Sunday night, Saturday night. Just one member. And that one member will go around to every home in their neighborhood. Maybe you send them a letter, or maybe you are going to them in person if you know everybody, and you invite them to that Bible study. And a few other folks from the local church need to come to that so that if others come, it's not just them and them, that they're just well attended. And then the next month, it shifts to another member in their neighborhood that's going to do the same thing. There's a lot of success in doing it that way as well. So I would encourage you all, if you're going to do this idea, put a chart in the back with the month and someone sign up. Make it happen. But all of these ideas, you know what they really start with? They really just start with one person saying, let's do this. So I'll bring it back to the beginning. Which two are you going to do? What are you going to do this week to be better at reaching the lost? And again, we want to pick two that we're not already involved with. I believe these are all helpful ways to reach the lost. And I hope everybody can find a way that they can get involved with this as well. Thank you for your patience tonight as we talked about those things. Lord willing, throughout the rest of the week, we're now going to be shifting our discussion to how do I study with this type of person? Tomorrow night, we will be addressing how to address and study with someone who's coming from a skeptic background, atheist, agnostic. Wednesday night, we will be discussing how to talk to somebody who's maybe religiously erring, involved with something that the Lord would not approve of in their particular church or denomination. Thursday night, we're going to be talking about how to reach the LGBTQ community, how to talk with those folks and show them the love of Christ. And then Friday night, we'll be talking about making lifelong disciples. Once you've baptized somebody, what next? How do you help someone get more grounded in the Lord? We'll talk about that Friday night. At this time, we're going to sing a song of encouragement. If you need prayers of the saints or would like to know more about what you need to do to become a Christian, we'd love to help you with that. Won't you come now as we stand and as we sing?